Nancy is the third Andrea Riseborough movie that I've seen, and it is another good one, in my opinion. It is the story of the character Nancy, who's kind of a dishonest person, kind of a scam artist, and she discovers that there is a family whose daughter went missing a while back, and the aged progression photograph of this young girl kind of resembles Nancy herself. So she makes contact with the parents, and the viewer is left wondering if is this just another scam or does she really feel this way. There's a lot of ambiguous feelings in this movie, but it is a very sad movie, and it has an expression of loneliness that is very beautiful, and I quite liked it. I would recommend it, but you have to be in the mood for that kind of thing and some emotional ambiguity, which a lot of people don't like. I also like that it was filmed in the Northeast. It looks like it was filmed in upstate New York during the winter, and I'm from New Jersey, so a lot of these kind of suburban snow-covered places looked very familiar. They were very well shot, and I enjoyed that aspect of it as well. So Nancy gets a recommendation. Next we have Paramore, The Final Riot, which is a concert film. If you like Paramore, you've seen this. It was actually a live CD that came with a DVD, but I have it on Blu-ray, and I watched it the other day. I've never seen it before. If I'm not mistaken, this is the band towards the end of when they had their original lineup, and it actually comes before my favorite Paramore album, which is the self-titled album. But I gave it 5 stars because it's Paramore. Next we have Offspring, which is part of the trilogy that the movie The Woman is the second movie in. I've been wanting to watch the whole trilogy because the stories are obviously interconnected, and the creative people behind all 3 movies are interconnected in ways that I'll explain further in a minute. This movie is very different from The Woman in a sense that this is kind of less character driven. It has a little less depth to it, but it is a properly fucked up movie with a lot of gore, a lot of really, really nasty situations. And I'm not going to say like I love this movie, but it really went there. And a lot of times when I'm watching horror movies, I'm waiting for it. Like, how fucked up is this going to get? Is this really going to go there? And this movie definitely did. And this is the debut of Pollyanna McIntosh as the character, the woman, which the second movie came out of. So it was decent, and it was cool to go back and watch the beginning of that trilogy. Next we have King Kelly, a movie starring Louisa Krause. I think this is the third Louisa Krause movie that I've seen. This is a kind of a found footage movie about this girl named Kelly she's kind of a cam girl, and the movie actually starts with a rather explicit scene of her doing a cam girl performance, and I said, oh boy, I hope there's not a lot of this in this movie because I'm not down for that. But it becomes just a night in the life of this very flawed and trashy and irresponsible and annoying person. And this movie is very hard to recommend because it's very annoying, and her character is so obnoxious, but that's the whole point of it. And as the night unfolds and it gets crazier, and there's a whole situation with drugs and murder and all, like just all this crazy stuff, and it's all shot from cell phones because these are social media people who just film their entire lives at all times. I did like Louisa Krause in this, but I also liked Libby Woodridge as Jordan, who is Kelly's best friend, and Jordan plays kind of the straight man to Kelly's buffoon, and I liked her a lot. She's not in a ton of stuff, but I would like to see more of her work. Next, we have The Woman, a rewatch of The Woman. And I've talked about this movie a lot, obviously. So I want to touch on a few other things beyond my initial review, which was a couple of weeks ago. I want to talk about how awesome Angela Bettis is in this as the mother, Mrs. Cleek. I forget her first, Belle Cleek. She's just great, and I didn't give her a shout out. I didn't even mention her in my first go around. I just want to talk about a weird quirk with this movie. After I rewatched it, I took the Blu-ray, the Arrow Blu-ray that I got. It has 4 commentary tracks, so I ended up watching the movie a total of 5 times over 2 days. And the first time I watched the movie, I saw Peggy reading this book in the beginning of the movie, and I thought, I'm going to get a copy of that book because I want to know, is there any significance to it? It's very prominently and clearly displayed at the beginning of the movie. So I got the book, I read it, and this was before I was able to listen to the commentaries on the Blu-ray to understand if there was any significance on purpose. And it's a cool book. I couldn't find any connection to the story of the woman or the character of Peggy, but I thought, wow, this is a really cool book, a really kind of gritty crime thriller with, it moves fast. It's only 130 pages. Cool ass book, right? And then I listened to the commentary and the director says, oh, we had Peggy reading John McDonald because I love John McDonald. And that was basically it. And then at the end of the book, at the end of the movie, she's reading what I thought was this book, but it turns out she's reading a different book because the director in the commentary says, oh, it takes her a long time to read a book, doesn't it? Or is she reading really fast and that's a different book? And I'm like, wait a minute, is it a different book? So it turns out that it is. Now, I had to pause it, rewind it, look carefully. I did like some sleuthing to find out what the second book she was reading was. But I was able to pause it and I could see a 1-letter, then a 3-letter, then a 2-letter word. So I thought it was a day in, like a day in something, a day in the life of. But what the book actually is A Key to the Suite, which is another John D. McDonald book. I had to look up a list of all his books and find one that had that kind of letter combination. And the way Peggy rolls the spines on her book, you couldn't see the cover, but I could see a sliver of it that had the right colors. And I haven't received that book, but I ordered a copy of it and I'm excited to read it. So I wonder, sometimes I do these kind of things and I wonder, am I the only person who's going to read these particular 2 books because they were read by the character of Peggy Cleek in the movie The Woman? So I don't know. Am I the only person who's ever going to do that? I will never know. But suffice it to say, I still love this movie now. I've seen it 6 times or whatever, if you count the times I've watched it with the commentary tracks. And it's each time I watch it, it's under my skin a little bit deeper. So next we have Darlin, which is the 3rd movie in the trilogy, which this one was written and directed by Pollyanna McIntosh, who plays the woman. And this movie was very kind of strange and very different than the first 2, which is good. I can't tell how I feel about this movie on first watch. There's a lot going on, and that's why I gave it 2.5 stars. It's kind of right down the middle for me. I didn't love it. I didn't hate it. It's very anti-religious, anti-Christian, anti-Catholic, and I'm not sure what was driving that in the creators' hearts and minds. And you know, most stuff is like that. I've talked about it before. Yeah, I just in my notes here I put, I'm glad this exists, but I don't know if it's a great movie. I also got to shout out Maddie Nichols, who plays a character Billy, who becomes friends with Darlin. And I just really liked her performance and her character. And she's been in a couple other things that I've seen. So I'm glad to have finally completed this trilogy, but I think the only one I need to own physically is The Woman, which, as I said, I already have. And I think that's a very feature-rich Blu-ray from Arrow Video. They did a great job on that. What do we have next here? The Nowhere Inn. I didn't even know this existed, and this is really cool, although it's an odd one because I don't know who to recommend this to. What The Nowhere Inn is a faux documentary slash surrealist comedy starring St. Vincent and Carrie Brownstein. So St. Vincent, real name Annie Clark, is a musical artist who has some great albums. I'm a fan. But then Carrie Brownstein, actually behind me over here, this is a Sleater-Kinney poster. Sleater-Kinney has been one of my favorite bands for as long as I can remember, since I was a teenager. I love Sleater-Kinney, and specifically Carrie Brownstein. It was and is kind of a hero of mine as far as songwriting and guitar playing and performance and all that stuff. I've always loved her. Read her books. I like Portlandia and all that stuff. But just as a musician and a performer, I've always been a big fan and looked up to her. So when I found out this movie existed, it came out, as you can see, in 2020, and I didn't know about it. But I was scrolling through Canopy, and I saw the unmistakable image of St. Vincent here in the thumbnail, and I looked into it, and I was like, oh my God, I have to watch this as soon as possible. And I liked it a lot. Now, having said that, is somebody who doesn't know who St. Vincent is going to like this? Is somebody who's not a fan of Carrie Brownstein or doesn't know who she is going to like this? I have no idea. Like, I thought it was really funny, but I'm recognizing that I have a massive bias to really like this movie. So take it with a grain of salt and check it out if you want to. First of all, if you like St. Vincent, but otherwise you'll be going out on a limb to check this one out. Next is Do You Like Hitchcock? And this is actually the first Dario Argento movie I've ever seen, which is kind of weird because this is a later movie of his that I believe is made for TV, but it is a thriller where the killers are kind of homaging Hitchcock movies and acting out their murder plots are kind of the same plot lines as Strangers on a Train, Dial M for Murder. There's even references to my favorite Hitchcock film, Notorious. And the main character is kind of a film buff, a film student, and he realizes what's going on. And there's also major rear window influence in this movie. And I thought the movie was moving very sluggishly for like the first 15-20 minutes, and I was like, oh man, this is brutal. Is this going to be hard to get through? But then it started coming together in a way that had me guessing about the plot, and I thought I had to figure it out, and I was really getting into the whodunit aspect of it, and I ended up being wrong, but that pulled me through. It really like ramped up my interest in the movie, and I ended up really liking it. So I gave it 3.5. And I watched, the version I watched was an AI upscale done by Mr. Cooper, who I have talked about many times. And if you're not following on Twitter by now, go follow Mr. Cooper because he is an absolute G. Next is a movie that was kind of, I would say, homework for me. The story about me watching this movie is that I have a group of coworkers who always talk about sports. And I'm not very interested in sports currently. So when they're talking about football, I have no clue or interest in what they're talking about. So now that it's becoming baseball season, they say, Sean, do you like baseball? And I say, I used to really like baseball. And the conversations went to when I used to live in Austin, Texas. I used to go to the Dell Diamond a lot and watch the Round Rock Express games. And I said, I live in Raleigh now. I need to go see a Durham Bulls game. I haven't been yet, and I've heard the ballpark is really nice and it's a fun time. And they all say, haven't you ever seen Bull Durham? And I hadn't until Friday. So I watched the movie, and there were certain things I loved about it. I love that it's from the late 80s, so I always am nostalgic for just seeing the world around this time, especially an area that I now live in. And there's no sites or landmarks that are in this movie that I have seen with my own eyes just yet, but researching some of the filming locations, they are indeed local to me, which is pretty neat. The thing I didn't really love about the movie is the plot, which is basically a love triangle between Kevin Costner's character, who is mentoring this younger minor league ball player, and that's what this is about, like minor league baseball players, played by Tim Robbins. And Tim Robbins is kind of he's just a goof. He's a young goofy kid who he kind of wants to be a rock star. He thinks he's a rock star, and Costner's been in the league forever, and he's been tasked with kind of wrangling this idiot kid and getting him to pitch good, So the wild card in the plot is Susan Sarandon's character, who is kind of a groupie for baseball players, and she is the crux of this love triangle between these three guys. I didn't like the love triangle stuff. I didn't like Susan Sarandon's character, but I did like the Costner as a mentor to Tim Robbins' character plot. Like, there's one scene in particular where they're on the bus and Kevin Costner says probably what is the key line of the movie to Tim Robbins. He said, "You have a gift, but you don't know how to use it because you don't respect yourself, or you have no respect for yourself." I'm not getting it exactly right, but that was kind of, when that came through, I thought, okay, there's a truth there. There's something there. But the rest of it was just kind of like horny boomer nonsense. So yeah, that's Bull Durham. I saw it. It was homework, but now I've seen it. Next is The Boy. This movie is another recommendation from the Cobwebs channel, and I've mentioned him before. I am a big fan of all his videos. He recommends some cool movies. Most of them are available on physical media because that's a facet of his channel, is the collecting aspect of it. I don't want to ape his review of this movie too much, but what he liked about the movie is kind of the same things that I liked about the movie. First and foremost, it stars Lauren Cohan, which I'm not super familiar with. I realized after the fact that she's in The Walking Dead, which is a show that I've never watched, but my wife was obsessed with it. So when I made that connection, I was like, oh yeah, that's that really lovely woman who's in The Walking Dead, who's not Pollyanna McIntosh. So there's something about a absolutely foxy woman in a movie that can really carry me through it. And I watch a lot of movies for the babes. That's why I watch so many Emma Roberts movies, so many Samara Weaving movies. Like, I think I have a new favorite babe here with Lauren Cohan, because she is just absolutely easy on the eyes through this whole movie, and she's on the screen for basically the whole runtime. So the other thing that I really like about this movie is that it's a PG-13 horror movie, and I love PG-13 horror movies. I know a lot of people poo-poo them, and some people think they shouldn't even exist, but I love them, and it is because, as I mentioned earlier in this video, when I watch horror movies, I'm waiting to see how fucked up they will get. But when you watch a PG-13 horror movie, you know how fucked up it's going to get, which is not very fucked up. So they have to be creative with the plot, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. They can't rely on splatter, gore, TNA, sex, all that stuff. So that's why I truly do love PG-13 movies, and I want to get this one on Blu-ray. The plot is Lauren Cohan plays this woman who takes a job as a nanny, and she realizes right away that the parents of this family are asking her to nanny a doll, and the doll is it's a porcelain life-size doll of a boy, and his name is Brahms. So right away you're in a what would you do situation if you were placed in this kind of ridiculous situation for a job, some security, a place to be, and all you got to do is watch a porcelain doll, and the parents are going to go away for a while. So it's very interesting, and again, Lauren Cohan just is an absolute babe. Next we have Wicked City, also known as Sam. And this is a really cool instance of a movie that was formerly considered lost and then popped up on YouTube, basically. Now, Wicked City on Letterboxd has a very low view count, but the YouTube video, which I will link below so you can go watch the movie, has tons of views on it. So I think a lot of people are seeing this movie. And it is about a young woman whose grandmother dies, leaves her a lot of money, and she decides to go on her own from the suburbs of upstate New York to go live in New York City to go to school, to take the inheritance from her grandmother and go to school. So it's one of those movies where she just packs a bag, hops on a bus, and ends up in New York City and tries to enroll in school, ends up being semi-homeless, crashing in different places. It's it has kind of an after-school movie vibe a little bit, but I think that might have to do with the time in which it was made. It is an indie film that was never actually released, from what I understand, but it is a competently made, professionally made movie. The acting is a little bit lacking, but in general, it's a very well done film. The other cool thing about this is the soundtrack. It's what I would call a music video movie. There's a lot of just full musical pieces where she's just walking around and there's a song playing. And what's really cool about this, it is punk and alternative music from the late 90s, but it's stuff that I happen to be not familiar with. Like, it's bands that I've heard of, like Civ and H2O. Like, I know these names, but these are bands that I never gotten into. So even though the vibe and New York City in the 90s and being in a band in the 90s was all in my wheelhouse, it was a lot of music that I was unfamiliar with. So it was this cool mix of nostalgia and newness that I really enjoyed. So Wicked City, again, I'm going to link it down in this video. You can just go watch it yourself and form your own opinion. Next, we have Interstellar 5555, which is the Daft Punk anime. I did this as a double feature yesterday morning with Wicked City, and it's really funny. After watching Wicked City, I just kind of sat with it and let it soak into my soul. Then I put on Interstellar 5555, and I kind of let my emotions out. It's very, very odd, but during one more time as the movie opens, the waterworks started for me. It was very interesting, like psychologically. I don't even have any notes for this. This movie is the album Discovery, which is Daft Punk's second album. It's one of the greatest albums of all time. It's one of my favorite albums of all time. And it is set to a Toei-produced science fiction anime that fits with the music. So there are some sound effects added, but mostly you're just listening to the album Discovery by Daft Punk. And it's great. It's phenomenal. It's fantastic. It keeps your attention. Your eyes will be glued to the screen. I would say just a little bit like the St. Vincent movie, that if you don't like Daft Punk, you're not going to like this. But who the hell doesn't like Daft Punk? And who the hell doesn't like Discovery? Again, it's like one of the most... It's just a magnificent album. It's one of the most universally recommendable albums. Like, you know, that famous question, if somebody had never heard music before, what would you recommend to them? I might say listen to Discovery by Daft Punk. And if somebody had never seen an anime before, I might say go watch Interstellar 5555. More like Interstellar 555 stars, am I right? Next, I watched Borderline. And say it with me. Samara Weaving action horror comedy. That's another one of these. Now, as I was watching the beginning of this, I was curious where it was going to go tonally. I found it took a while to find its footing, and took a while to form, like, am I actually enjoying this movie? But by the end, I was into it, and I do want to watch it again. I might even rate it a little bit higher, and if it does ever come out on Blu-ray, I'm probably going to try and grab it. It's about Samara Weaving plays this pop star who has an obsessed fan who tries to get into her house repeatedly, eventually assaults one of her security guards and ends up in a mental hospital. And then the movie kind of kicks off when he breaks out of the mental hospital. And it is a black comedy. And again, I was just waiting to see how fucked up is this movie going to get? And it doesn't go there. Is it? Because it's a dark comedy. And I thought, is it going to lean into dark or is it going to lean into comedy? And it leans into comedy, and I think the movie's better for it. So again, with a rewatch, I think I would enjoy it a little bit more. And I have to shout out Alba Batista, who plays Penny, and Penny was one of my favorite characters in this movie. Definitely kind of a spark of chaos that this actress I've never seen before, and now I want to check out more of her stuff as well. Last night I watched Long Live the New Flesh, Films of David Cronenberg, which is a made-for-TV documentary that was hosted on Rare Film by John W. If you don't follow him on Twitter, you should also follow him. I wasn't in the mood to watch an entire Cronenberg movie, but I watched this because it's about an hour long. And it was really cool because it's a pretty old documentary, and it has Martin Scorsese, Stephen King, a few other people just talking about David Cronenberg and his work. And it has a lot of clips from the show. And actually, I don't know if I mentioned, but Wicked City, Interstellar 5555, and this I watched on my CRT TV. And because they're all 4:3 aspect ratio or something close to it. And when I have the opportunity to watch something like that on my Tube TV, I do. So that was a lot of fun. That brings us to this morning. I had a little bit of a double feature, and the first movie I watched was Alucarda. It's a horror movie about two women who sell their souls to the devil and their odd community who tries to exorcise them. But that plot synopsis does not do this movie justice, because this movie really goes there. As I've said a few times in this video, it is so chaotic and crazy, especially towards the very end, that it really deserves its reputation as something pushing the envelope. And I quite enjoyed it. I am reticent to super recommend movies like this because, again, they're very dark. And in fact, I was thinking about Osgood Perkins movies and how he likes to put characters in that say "Hail Satan," and every time I see that in one of his movies, I cringe a little. Like, is that supposed to be edgy? Like, come on, you could be creepy without just having a character straight up saying "Hail Satan." It's kind of corny. In Alucarda, there's a scene where the two women are chanting an oath to the devil in unison, and it creeped the hell out of me. I found it very unsettling. So that made me think of like how you do something like that right. And again, as the movie goes on, it gets more and more chaotic and crazy towards a amazing finale. And there were so many moments in this movie that made me sit up and just say, oh, that's awesome. You know, like when you're watching a movie and you get to do that, that's a lot of that happened here. Now, unfortunately, I'm not super informed about the history of this movie, but it seems that the only version available to watch is a rip of the DVD from Mondo Video, or actually having that DVD, which I don't own yet. I don't know if I want to get my hands on it, because here's the thing, like, I was watching it, it seems like the frame rate is a little weird. The sound had like a dull hum on the bottom end that made my subwoofer just like throughout the whole movie. And I just hope, I don't know if there exists a better print of it that can be restored, remastered, upscaled, made look better, made to sound better. I don't know. I gotta look into it. But that brings us to our final movie, which I watched right after Alucarda, which is Vampiros Lesbos. And what do you think the movie Vampiros Lesbos is about? I told my wife I was going to watch this movie, and she said, "Is that a porn?" And I said, "Well, it's a Jess Franco movie, so it remains to be seen. If it is a porn, I'm going to turn it off." Luckily, this movie is not pornographic at all. There's a lot of nudity, a lot of TNA, and there's some steamy, spicy stuff, but there's not even softcore sexual stuff. So I was grateful for that. I mean, the title of the movie is the synopsis of the movie, and it's a Jess Franco movie. So this is the second Jess Franco movie I've seen. The first one was the American cut of Female Vampire, and I think I enjoyed Female Vampire a little bit more, and I don't know if it's because it was my first exposure, no pun intended, to a Jess Franco movie. But going back to this one, maybe he was finding his footing and wasn't as good as when he made the Female Vampire a couple of years later. Also, Female Vampire has Lena Romay, and Vampiros Lesbos does not. It has two other lovely actresses who are not slouches at all, for sure. But yeah, I wonder if that's another factor in why I didn't like this one quite as much as Female Vampire. But 3 stars, I'm glad I watched it. And these Jess Franco movies have a way of never being boring. Like some older movies from the 70s and 60s can really slog on, even if it's like a quote unquote good movie. But with the 2 Jess Franco movies I've seen so far, it seems like there's never a dull moment. My eyes are always glued to the screen. So I don't know what factors into, well, this one wasn't as good as the other one or whatever. Maybe I'm just like not connected as much with the story or the vibe or the characters or whatever. So that's it. Vampiros Lesbos is the last movie for this week. If you made it into the end of the video, I appreciate it. What's your favorite movie from this week? I think my biggest recommendation besides Interstellar 5555 is to just go watch Wicked City, not the anime, the movie that I talked about earlier. It's pretty good. And if you like St. Vincent or Carrie Brownstein, you have to go watch The Nowhere Inn. So thanks for stopping by. Thanks for staying till the end, and I'll see you next week.